Alright guys, by now you've heard the rumors, you read the reports, and you've seen the tribute videos. JUGi and Glaive, for the moment anyway, are out of Astralis, and their sudden medical leaves of absence came as a shocking surprise to a lot of us. In their place are a group of former heroic players, two of which are going to stay on full-time in Astralis to form some kind of 7-man roster. I got questions. A lot of questions, and to get the answers, I went right to Astralis and talked to a few key people in the organization, namely their sports psychologist and their sports director. Strap in, full screen this video, and get ready, because we're going deep on this one. All right, before we go any further, guys, if you didn't know already, we are streaming on the regular these days, so head on over to twitch.tv/theScore esports and give us a follow and turn those notifications on. I promise you won't be sorry. And if you haven't subbed to this YouTube channel yet, come on, what are you waiting for? All right, so this all started about a month ago when the in-game leader for the best CSGO team of all time announced he was leaving. Not for good, but for 3 months due to stress and burnout. Basically, Glaive went on medical leave. This announcement came, by the way, right after winning a pretty important ESL Road to Rio event. Now, about a week after that, JUGi, the man they call the Clutch Minister, a key part of Astralis since day one, announced he too was going on medical leave, except his didn't have a time limit attached to it. Now, in Glaive's case, it all seemed pretty planned. I mean, it happened right after a big tournament, not right before one or God forbid during one, and they already had JUGi lined up to replace him. Okay. Now, with JUGi, things felt a little different. His leave of absence felt more like a domino effect that came as a result of Glaive's. I mean, Esatag wasn't able to join the team yet. They had Zonic forced to stand in, and Astralis seemed to be scrambling to find a replacement, who they eventually did in Snappy, their temporary stand-in. And so, in the span of just 9 days, the greatest CSGO team to ever play the game, the #1 ranked squad in the world as of May, was without 2 of its star players. And people were shocked, understandably. There were and continue to be just so many questions about these events. People were asking themselves, well, what's really going on here? I mean, they can't both just be on medical leave, right? Why now? Why these two? Who's next? How are they going to earn enough major qualifier points if they keep swapping people in and out? Why would Astralis Group announce reduced operating costs and then turn around and sign 2 new players? Is the 7-man roster really just some kind of smokescreen distraction for something going on within the Astralis Group organization? Will JUGi ever come back? Will Glaive? These are just a few of the questions that you would see flying around Twitter and Reddit and places like that. And everybody and anybody was speculating on what was happening, including us. And according to McNeil, Astralis also reached out allegedly to Alex on Vitality to have him jump into Astralis. So all of this together tells me that this situation is not exactly planned. There were reports, first from Jarek DK Lewis writing for Double Tap, and then most recently from Richard Lewis writing for Dexerto, that all might not be as it seemed with these roster moves. Contained in those reports were allegations from unnamed sources regarding friction between Astralis management and players on the subject of vacation time and breaks, as well as potential ulterior motives for JUGi's medical leave, among other things. From an outsider looking in perspective, it's hard to know what to think when you read stuff like this. So I went to Astralis to ask some key people what's really going on behind the scenes. Specifically, I talked to Astralis' sports psychologist Lars Robl, who has worked with elite traditional sports athletes and has a long background in the Danish Special Forces, and Kasper Hvidt, who is the sports director for Astralis and himself a former elite handball athlete. Let's start with one of the most basic questions about this whole situation. Is the reason that Glaive and JUGi are going on leave entirely because of stress and burnout, or are there any other ulterior motives or reasons behind that? When I asked Lars Robl, that's the sports psychologist, that question, he was very clear on the answer.
The reason why we have the guys on leave is because there's a need for it. That's not based on any tactics or thoughts behind it. It's because there's a need for it.
Okay, so now that Glaive and Xypix are on leave, there's another question that's been making the rounds in Reddit, in Twitter threads, you name it, and that is, are they actually going to come back to Astralis? Well, when I asked Astralis sports director Kasper Hvidt that question, he did not mince words.
But I don't care about people, what they think. I care about my players, and I care about Astralis and our possibilities to be a top team, both today and in the future. This is not an unknown disease. Burnout and stress is something everybody or many people have experienced. And of course there is a treatment, and of course we want them in the roster.
But when are they coming back exactly? For Glaive, it's been stated about 3 months from the time he left, but what about Xypix? Well, according to Robl, putting a hard deadline on this kind of thing can actually be counterproductive. It can add an additional stressor to an already burnt out athlete. Now, when they do come back, Kasper Hvidt, that's the sports director for Astralis, told me they're going to retain Esatog and JUGi to add depth to the roster for the long term. I mean, really long term.
But I believe I have the strongest Counter-Strike team ever. I should be really stupid to throw away some of them. I want to have this roster with the substitutes and with the wider roster the next 10 years. And I don't see why not. I know I'm able to do it if we take care of the players.
In fact, Astralis has already come out publicly and said they want a 10-man roster. Now, Hvidt told me not to hold my breath for that being implemented anytime in the near future, but from Astralis's perspective, the idea is clear: to give the players a chance to breathe.
And that is what I'm trying to secure here, and that is what I'm talking about in that blog, and what I'm hoping for, that everybody can see, okay, this actually makes a kind of sense. I'm a former pro athlete, 20 years. I've played professional handball, and we have more players that we have positions on the field because it's needed. Nobody, and I mean nobody, are able to live a life 24/7, 365, where you don't have an option to have a break. It's not fair to the players, and it's not fair to the orgs either, that we can plan. I think the way the teams are built right now, it's simply too vulnerable, I believe. It's not a possibility to build long-term with the vulnerability of having only 5 players for 5 positions. It's actually just impossible.
And he did admit that when it came to the players on Astralis, this system wasn't necessarily an easy sell at first.
But that back then the players said, no, but if we add a player, then we have suddenly competition inside the group. But now, almost 3 years later, the players, they know, okay, we need this kind of larger roster so everybody are able to have a break, and you don't feel this responsibility that if I'm not able to be there, I'm letting down all my teammates.
Astralis says it's all part of the effort on their part to transition CSGO to the next level of professionalism. And that means treating elite Counter-Strike athletes like elite traditional athletes, as Robl puts it.
When we're talking about the sport, the development and the challenges for the players at the moment, it's because it's based on the fact that these athletes that we see now on the high level, Astralis, phase or whatever, I mean, they haven't had any role models. Yeah, they had role models, but at that time, their role models, they were competing for a box of sodas or very few prize money. I mean, now it's a sport on a completely different level, and the demands put on the athletes are much bigger. I mean, they gotta see themselves as elite sport athletes.
But let's dial this back to Glaive for just a second. A lot of people have been asking, why now? Why would you feel burnt out at a time when there are less Counter-Strike events than ever and there's no travel due to COVID? Well, as Robl tells me, the discussion around Glaive's stress levels is not a new one.
Of course, it's before we get to the break, we have had long conversations. We have tried to find solutions within the organization, because I think it's very, very important that whatever solutions you find or take, it has to be taken with the athlete. We talked about, okay, what are the needs, what are the stresses, how can we help that within the organization, within him still playing. Yes, there was ups and downs, but finally we had to come to the conclusion that in order to avoid a serious burnout, we had to take him out of the fight, out of the battle, and just to reorganize.
And as previously reported by other esports media outlets, Robl confirmed to me that both Glaive and Xypix themselves were pushing for a meaningful break from play.
It was really Glaive saying, okay, now we have tried, I really need this. And then, okay, good, then we do it. It has been that, and it's always been that, also been that with the techniques.
Now, speaking of Xypix, one of the things that really hit me about this situation was how unplanned Xypix's break seemed compared to Glaive's. And Hvidt was able to confirm to me that originally he was planned to take a leave starting in July when Esatag could come in and take over for him.
There were some personal issues that suddenly happened, which made everything happen a little earlier. Actually, the plan was to give Andreas or Sydnix the break after 1st of July, when we have EasyTag coming in.
But with the unplanned nature of Xypix's departure, you gotta wonder who's next. Could Device, Magisk, or Dupree be dropping a tweet longer tomorrow announcing their medical leave? Well, according to Hvidt, that isn't the plan, but you never know what's gonna happen in the future.
You never know, as I'm just touching on with Andreas, something can happen. And actually, one of the main reasons for adding more players to the roster is my responsibility, which is Astralis today and within 10 days, 10 months, and 10 years.
And hey, speaking of the three other core of Astralis, how do they feel about Glaive and Xypix taking these leaves of absence?
I mean, really understanding. Of course, there is a frustration, and I mean, if you're not able to perform as you're used to perform, of course, over the longer run, it'll also cause some minor, and I will emphasize minor frustration in the team. Of course, it will, because it affects the team performance.
Both Robl and Hvidt were quick to point out to me that burnout isn't necessarily an Astralis problem. It's an industry-wide problem, and there is strong evidence to support that. I mean, Olaf Meister, Kjarby, Alex, these are all players who took a step back from the game at the same time that Glaive and Xypix did.
If you're not performing, you have this culture where you're benched. I mean, and the players know, because that's a culture. If you're not performing, then you're benched, and then you're off the team, and the next step is you're sold. So that makes it difficult for the players to stand up and say, okay, I need a break now. I'm on the edge now, and with the focus on the mental health of the players to step out. I think that's important, and I think also it's important that the other teams go along with that, because otherwise we won't hit the culture.
And if the idea is that Astralis is setting some kind of industry-wide trend with the 5+ man roster, where not every player has to go to every tournament, Hvidt says that might already be happening.
The day we presented JUGi, I was contacted by one of our main competitors who told me, we want to add a 6th player. How do you go on with the players? How do you talk with the players? How do you want to introduce it so it's going to help and not be a problem? We have seen in so many other games that there is an academy team. So it's easier. You have a guy ill and you just bring in the guy from the academy team. This is not something we invented out of space. It's something we see in other computer games within esports, and it's something we definitely see in traditional sport. So I think what is not logic here is that we didn't do it before, earlier.
And that essentially is the Astralis side of the story. The 7-man, later 10-man roster idea is a bold one. It could add some very deadly depth to an already dangerous CSGO team, or at the very least, give some of these guys a desperately needed break from the game. The early competitive results aren't encouraging, but I think it's pretty obvious that taking away 2 of the core 5 members of Astralis at the same time might not be the optimal way to implement the 5+ man roster. But with Rio more than 5 months away and Counter-Strike currently stuck in this online-only limbo meta, there may not be a better time to experiment with this kind of stuff. For me, and I think for a lot of Counter-Strike fans out there, the important thing in all of this is that Glaive and Xyp9x do come back fully rested to the roster that redefined greatness in CSGO, and are ready to take another shot at immortal glory in Rio in November. We'll be watching. Okay, this didn't make it into the core of the video, but I couldn't let this go without getting published in some way. I gotta tell you, the Astralis sports psychologist, Lars Robl, is actually fucking sick. He was a lieutenant colonel in the Danish Special Forces. He had something like 6 tours in Afghanistan, and that was all obviously before he got into the sports psychologist thing. Just imagine that dude walking into your team house where you're playing a game that simulates terrorism, counterterrorism operations. Whew, I'd listen to him.
But I remember when I first met Godsent, that was my first assignment into this, I didn't have a clue about it. But then they explained to me about the maps, that where to go and whatever they're called. And then I said, okay, now come with them. And then I showed them a map about a photo of Afghanistan and said, okay, that was my map for several. And that created some street credibility.